Hello and welcome to today's stream, where we'll be taking a look at Webull's investor presentation and comparing that to Robinhood. Of course, these are two discount brokers that are focused on a more mass market audience, and they're not perfectly one-to-one, of course, just given of course, the fact that Robinhood has been public for 2 years at this point, whereas Webull has just filed a SPAC, or this is a SPAC merger announcement presentation, which of course hasn't actually closed yet. But nevertheless, these two players are, where the fact that Robinhood is a public company, and does have some interesting idiosyncratic factors compared to the other quote unquote brokers in their space, right? Because conceptually, in that brokerage space, right? Like you don't really have many pure play brokerages these days, right? There used to be TD Ameritrade, which merged with Schwab, Fidelity's private, and of course, right? And you think about Fidelity, right? That it's not just a brokerage, right? It has like a huge investing arm. In some ways, it's functionally a bank with its all the savings products, and it's a lot of retirement stuff, right? So more of like an enterprise focus in that sense, right? Charles Schwab, right? Again, right? It is a bank, as we clearly certainly learned with the banking crisis from a little over a year ago, right? Of course, to today. Our brokers, E-Trades and Morgan Stanley's apparatus, right? And the entire point is, right, at the end of the day, a brokerage, and you'll see this when we look at Webull's presentations, especially Robinhood, right, and the different innovations they've made recently. They're not just a broker, right? Like, or certainly the argument they make to investors that the brokerage is the top of the funnel, and from there you can then upsell consumers into banking products, functionally. And you see, and SoFi is probably the best manifestation of that. But again, right, you can just look at how brokerage techniques or broker features are used in so many different consumer finance apps, right? Like Cash App has an investing or a brokerage feature. Venmo has a crypto brokerage type of connection, right? And again, right, when you think about like JP Morgan, right? JP Morgan has this brokerage, right? Wells Fargo, right? A lot of banks have, they're mainly very clunky, but they do have broker features. And so, and so with that heuristic, right, that a brokerage isn't the end state of that type of company, right? But it's part of the broader financial services solution, right? And again, right, you can argue that Fidelity or Charles Schwab or probably like the closest you can get to a full stop shop, and well, presumably within there's a lot of room for these smaller guys. And again, right, when you think about customer segmentation and the different cohorts, by which I mean just different age groups, right? Conceptually, right, it's probably more likely that a younger person's gonna encounter Robinhood or Webull, um, and then from there, of course, once you're in, right, you have there are transaction costs and there are switching costs, just like the right, try to eat the tax implications of selling to move your cash to a broker, or you have to pay fees, or certainly even if there's a waiver, still not the most natural process. And so with that high level overview and so the big point of that is that the brokers like Webull and Robinhood, they are brokers, but that's not all they are. And there's bigger ambitions to be a bit more of a broader financial services, consumer finance product company, which just makes sense, right? Because I mean that's the playbook, right? That's literally the playbook of that Charles Schwab and Morgan Stanley clearly did, right, by acquiring brokers, because they see how having a brokerage arm naturally connects into banking and then to wealth management. And there's certainly certainly modestly lucrative things that are out there. So focusing on the Webull, of course, SPAC, um, right? Of course, in a SPAC, right, it is a publicly listed shell, publicly listed company that doesn't really have much besides just being a pot of money, and I suppose having the management team of the SPAC in terms of whatever financial engineering professionals are there, who will then go acquire privately listed business. So here we see Webull, 20 million users registered globally, and we compare that to Robinhood, 23.6. Right, so Webull, a smaller player, not really investor, just an investor base, right? Like Lightspeed, Kotu, General Atlantic, certainly the first three, or first two, pretty name brand, tech, growth equity type investors, industry tailwinds. Globalization, yeah, it's certainly the same playbook or tailwinds Robinhood was riding off of. Company, right? Investing right here, we start seeing some bank stuff, right? Retirement, right? Deepening that relationship or maintaining the break in. I forgot to mention interactive brokers. Talking about so interactive brokers is certainly a pure play. So apologies for not mentioning them. But again, right, certainly targeting a different segment of the market, right? Just one look at that user interface, even with the redesign, should pretty clearly segment them from the Webull Robinhood target cohort. But I suppose what I said about brokers being like that starting state, which will change into that end state of a holistic consumer finance or or personal finance one-stop shop. I suppose then that interactive brokers is certainly like the counterfactual of an alternative development route. And certainly, if there's anything that can be said about the world, right, there is no one way to achieve happiness or modernity. Am I right? So, yeah. So I suppose Webull can pick. Do you want to be a Vlad Tenev or uh, or Ted Pick, or do you want to be a Thomas Peterfly? Well, today, 8.2 billion customer assets, which I'm going to imagine is the same process under custody. And I mean, there's a again these numbers not explicitly to me like 1-to-1, but I think there you see a pretty big. Okay, here 4.3 million funded accounts, 23.6 funded accounts at Robinhood. So certainly there is a clear scale difference between the two that, that should be acknowledged and get rid of those customer assets rate major difference. So certainly Webull is just from this comparison, clearly a smaller player. Another interesting thing, and the thing that reminded me about the interactive brokers connection, is how internationally diverse Webull is. Somehow interactive brokers has its services in a lot of more countries, whereas like Robinhood and most other brokers are pretty limited to just being like US. Robinhood's talked about like moving into the UK, competing with eToro, those European brokers. But even then, right, that like Robinhood's like US and then like UK, whereas here, right, I'm not sure. Yeah, they're not competing per se. Indonesia uh, customers the way like interactive brokers would. Engagement in financial, yeah, hard to argue against these things. I mean, I think if we look at interactive brokers, there's a similar consensus, right? That increased financialization uh, and adoption is just going to continue. It's hard to argue against those tailwinds. Oh, another discount broker, Futu, the Chinese broker, which has Moomoo for its U.S. facing account, is another pure play standalone. I suppose that could be a different video, but yeah, certainly nice broker. Interestingly, the fee schedule, because Moomoo being Futu, right? You think that the niche should be like access to Hong Kong and mainland China A shares. However, it turns out the fee structure between the two, between Interactive Brokers and Moomoo, the slash Futu, are numerically the same. That's presented different ways from like the minimum to like a service charge. Uh, Anyways, on that broker account, all these Robinhood, Webull, um, Moomoo, all great, all fine brokers. They're of course take advantage of the promotions they have. If I was a bit more entrepreneurial, I would have links in the description. But yeah, it's only right take advantage of these promos, right? Yeah, if they're willing to subsidize your, if they're willing to spend that customer acquisition cost, take advantage of it. And here is right, Ameritrade, Schwab, E-Trade, Morgan Stanley. The social media aspect always a bit gimmicky, in my view. It is always amusing. Like you look at DraftKings, and DraftKings has its like social feature uh, for bets of varying degrees of value, and it's always a bit amusing of like who is the average user in your sample size, right? Because everything is selection bias, and certainly the user base of a Webull is going to be different than that of say a Bloomberg terminal user, and as well. But I think about how those two buckets overlay onto a normal distribution of say investing sophistication, and it's always been amusing to think about where on the how many standard deviations are you from the other guy. I suppose in the case of DraftKings, it's not as clear where quote unquote sophisticated bettors or expected value positive bettors go compared to uh, your local addict to very unlikely to donating money to brokers on parlays. Always a fun and mental abstract, and of course, right within the honestly, yeah, I should. I certainly would be interesting to do a comparison between the different betting companies. Of course, you have the U.S. listed ones, right? Like Flutter Entertainment recently listed on the U.S. And of course, FanDuel and a large portfolio of international brands, and DraftKings, Entain, or you just think about U.S. listed. So there's Flutter who's listed, and your DraftKings, Penn. Then you have your omni-channel, Caesars, MGM, Penn. And you have Rush Street Interactive, RSI. You have some data providers in Sports Radar and Genius. And I'm sure you could then argue that some of the payment rails, such as in PayPal through Venmo, are relevant on U.S. listed. So that's DraftKings, Penn, MGM, Caesars, and of course MGM. It's the joint venture, and I didn't know of MGM. MGM's joint venture for BetMGM is of course Entain, which is U.S. listed. Also, a UK company is SGHC Super Gaming, which uh, has pretty significant exposure to African gaming, which has a when you think about what's your what your earnings are dependent on, it's a bit of a funny abstraction um, of who the bettors are, who are supporting your marginal claim on its future cash flows. And of course, in UK you have Bet365, which I don't think has an ADR listing. You've got those are the big players. I think a lot of the European countries have local or like the national certified like betting operator. And I know France has one that doesn't have a ADR listing. The Greek one, like Greek's national, I don't want to say I'm not sure if it's like a state licensed monopoly, but Greece has a public or still has an ADR for their gaming company. John Stoichman, which you can see as a sponsor of Olympiacos, like GOFPY. So gaming industry is certainly interesting. And that was a bit of a side tangent from the focus today. But anyways, yeah. So the other point was, like these social media features. Like certainly, I'm not complaining. It's like it's good. It's better to have it than not have it. But I think, and to the degree, right, that like Bloomberg Terminal is special because you can message anybody on it, or you can, or get like there is that network, like literally, just given like that messaging feature. Like it is amusing to think about, well, who your quote unquote counterparty is when you're messaging someone on Webull. Product, I suppose in this case, right, targeting is different customer, right? Webull seems to be targeting a bit more of like an um, active or I don't want to say like technical analysis minded or anything disparaging like that. But it's certainly compared to like there's certainly overlap, but from a product differentiation point, right? I do think objectively that the Webull user interface is a bit more noisy than Robinhood, right? Just given some of the more features and right like detail oriented versus the Robinhood minimalist perspective. So that's a Webull company. They don't seem to really talk about banking stuff. But the reason I was thinking about the banking stuff, right, is of course I'm sure you might have seen Robinhood with its like IRA match contribution match of like 3%. Their new four like was it 3 or 4% cashback gift card, right? And all of those sounds uh, certainly like that 4% gift card, right? Like where Robinhood is basically giving you all of the interchange. Uh, and again, apologies if interchange isn't the right term for what Robinhood as the issuing quote unquote bank gets to take. Um, and of course, yeah, the payments industry, so it's always more sophisticated um, or complicated than you would think for all these different payment rails. But that's why, right, Visa, Mastercard, Adyen can, can carve out the space. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So the point of like Robinhood is, and of course it might just come down to like the maturity cycle, right? And again, right, 119 billion versus 8 billion, 24 million customers funded versus uh, what was like 4 million for Webull. Right, so clearly, right, again, you do need some scale in order for some banking stuff to be meaningful. And with the entire regional bank discussion, right, like this local Philadelphia bank getting closed by the FDIC, right, like scale does matter. And to that point of scale, uh, you know, I think that's the lens through which you can view Robinhood's like aggressive customer acquisition strategy with Robinhood Golds and that 4% cashback gift card or those matches on IRAs. Because I think about again, I haven't read the terms and conditions, but it seemed like that matches off the value of the IRA. So if you it's like a 3% match, or even say like it's a 2% or 1% match, if you transfer over like like $1 million IRA, like are they really gonna match you? Like conceptually, and again, that is helpful for Robinhood, right? Because now, of course, to receive the bonus, you have to be locked in for a year. Again, there's switching costs, so it's relatively sticky. And then Robinhood gets custody, maybe they can, your shares are up for, being sold for margin or, um, and all of those means. And so, in the grand scheme of, I'm sure Robinhood, understands their whatever customer acquisition costs they want to have for that long-term growth. But that long-term growth only makes sense if part of that broader where to me it tends to make sense only in terms of being that broader consumer app, a consumer finance app, instead of just a broker, right? Because at a certain point where you speak a broker, right, you're kind of, you know, I don't want to say you're cyclical, given how increased trading volume is probably a bit of a acyclical, grower. Uh, because you have like Virtu, who's public, and talk to you more on like that payment for order flow side. And of course, payment for order flow, right? It's always some scrutiny around it. So, but yeah, I think the big thing though, right, is just the difference in scale between Robinhood and Webull. And it's certainly that's something that, when I read this Webull presentation originally separately on its own, I didn't quite understand how it's like, a quarter of Robinhood. And so broadly speaking, right, these discount brokers, again, it's probably something that you or people have interacted with that are interesting things. And again, right, it's always, I think, reasonably interesting to look at, the financials or business model from the business perspective, from like the management perspective of the services or products that you use, whether it's in gaming. There was this funny article about Dave and Buster's integrating basically betting into its own arcade games, which I think with all of the prop bets and offshore sports books, fair enough. But there's nothing more humbling or what I imagine introspective than reading DraftKings earnings report and say when they say or when they talk about their hold percentage, right, with parlays being much higher than their hold percentages on regular just straight bets, or they talk about we've had favorable sporting events that helped us have better results or unfavorable. It's always, I think, humbling when I think about, well, as the consumer, you're on the other side uh, of those transactions functionally, right? So it's always a bit humbling to think about. And I think when it comes to brokers, there's a bit more incentive alignment in the sense that, right, your success rate, your personal investment account appreciating in value, is good for the broker, certainly on a nominal term of just reporting customer assets. Whereas the sports books, there is a bit more of an adverse relationship, which again is just another, reason to be a bit circumspect about using the sports books, certainly for large sums of transaction volume, right? And how much vig you want to keep on contributing. But so that is Webull, and that is a quick glance to Robinhood. We're not diving into a full. There was an interesting write up on Robinhood's strategy from yet another value blogs. Um, I won't. It is an interesting write up he did, like discussing. That's where like he pointed out like the IRA contribution shenanigans. We'll be getting into that on this video, but nevertheless, I think Webull, they did not mention a specific closing date on this transaction per se. I think, and the SPAC is trading at over the $10 SPAC cash bucket at 11. So clearly, markets somewhat or certainly interested in this. And again, right, I think there is lots. Again, the financials aren't out. We're not looking at the financials today, but I think right, there are some interesting arguments between the Robinhood and Webull business models of that broker. And again, right, you've got that optionality to dive into and broaden out into consumer banking or banking and retirement and wealth management. So interesting opportunity for probably maybe these brokers that you don't necessarily associate being involved in those areas. So thank you for watching. Continue to be safe and let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on these companies.